The Secret of the Radiant Bride. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into this story that will make you question everything you believe, I want to know, where are you watching us from today? Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories, and like this video if you love a good mystery. The event hall was perfect. White roses cascaded from crystal vases. Champagne flowed like a river. And the bride? Well, Celine was flawless. Young, radiant. She looked exultant next to Dominic Vargas, a successful businessman who couldn't stop smiling at his stunning new wife. But in a corner of the ballroom, watching in silence from her wheelchair, sat Sarah Fuentes, Dominic's ex-wife. Their divorce had been finalized just hours before this sumptuous ceremony. What disconcerted the few guests who noticed her wasn't her presence, but her expression. Sarah wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was smiling, a quiet, knowing smile that suggested she was the only one in the room who understood what was really happening. A history of success and premonitions. 3 years ago, Sarah Fuentes stood at a podium in a crowded bookstore, reading the final passage from her latest suspense novel, Shadows of Deceit. The audience hung on her every word, mesmerized by her storytelling ability. In the front row, Dominic, her husband of 8 years, watched with obvious pride as his wife captivated the room. You see, the most dangerous predators aren't the ones who threaten you openly, Sarah read from the final page. They're the ones who make you feel safe, right up until the moment they strike. The crowd erupted in applause as she closed the book. Later, as they drove home in their luxury sedan, Dominic leaned over to squeeze her hand. "You know what amazes me about you," he said, his eyes briefly leaving the road to meet hers. "The depth with which you understand human nature. The way you peel back the layers of deception in your books. It's as if you can see right through people." Sarah laughed. "Perhaps that's why you've never tried to hide anything from me." "Nothing to hide," he replied with a smile. "Besides, in the end, you'd find out. You always do." Their home was a showcase of their success. A beautiful colonial house in an exclusive Manhattan neighborhood, filled with art they had collected together, photographs from their travels, and an entire wall of bookshelves that displayed Sarah's novels in multiple languages. In Dominic's study, he kept a framed copy of her first book's cover next to photos of them on their wedding day. Sarah's writing studio overlooked the manicured garden. Here, she crafted the psychological thrillers that had earned her both critical acclaim and commercial success. Her stories often explored betrayal, moral ambiguity, and the capacity of ordinary people to commit extraordinary sins when pressed by circumstance or desire. "You write about so much darkness," her friends would sometimes say, "but your life is so perfect." And indeed, it seemed perfect. Dominic's investment firm was thriving. Sarah's latest book contract had come with a substantial advance. They hosted dinner parties where guests stayed until midnight, reluctant to leave the warm atmosphere of their home. They discussed starting a family, though both had been so focused on their careers that they had postponed parenthood until their late 30s. The twist of fate. Then came the rainy Tuesday that changed everything. Sarah was driving home from a meeting with her publisher. The roads were slick with rain. Later, she would only remember fragments, headlights coming toward her. Too bright, too close. The sickening screech of metal, the world spinning. Then, darkness. She woke up in the hospital 3 days later to the sound of monitors and Dominic's voice, hoarse with worry, saying her name over and over. When the doctor explained her spinal cord injury, incomplete paraplegia, a medical term that translated to a life changed forever, Dominic squeezed her hand so tightly it hurt. "We'll get through this," he promised. The best specialists, the best rehabilitation, whatever it takes. For the first few weeks, his support was unyielding. He rearranged his schedule to be with her during physical therapy. He personally interviewed home care providers. He researched experimental treatments and adaptive technologies. At night, he slept in the uncomfortable chair beside her hospital bed, refusing to leave. But as weeks turned into months, as the reality of Sarah's condition became clearer, that she would likely never walk unassisted again, something shifted in Dominic. It was subtle at first. He began arriving at the hospital later, leaving earlier. He would take calls in the hallway, his voice dropping to a whisper. When Sarah would ask him about work, his answers became vague. "Just dealing with some difficult clients," he would say. "Nothing to worry about." When Sarah returned home, their house had been modified with ramps and wider doorways. Her writing studio had been moved to the ground floor. Everything was practical, accessible, and somehow colder than she remembered. Dominic hired a home health aide named Miriam, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and skilled hands. Miriam helped Sarah with her exercises, with bathing and dressing, with the 100 small humiliations that came with her new reality. "Your husband went to a lot of trouble to make you comfortable," Miriam observed during their first week. "Yes," Sarah replied, looking at the carefully redesigned spaces. "He did everything, except be here." Dominic's absences grew longer, his explanations more perfunctory. Late nights at the office, weekend conferences, client emergencies. Sarah, who had always been observant, who made her living by noticing the small details that revealed bigger truths, began to see the signs clearly. A receipt from an expensive restaurant on a night he claimed to be working late. A trace of unfamiliar perfume on his collar. The way he no longer looked her in the eyes when he talked about his day. And then there was his assistant, Celine. Young, beautiful, attentive. Celine, who had started working for Dominic just before Sarah's accident. Celine, who began calling the house with increasing frequency, her voice honey-sweet as she explained that Mr. Vargas had left his phone at the office or needed a particular file, or had asked her to consult with Mrs. Fuentes. What do you think is the real reason for Dominic's distance? Is he overwhelmed with the challenges of being a caregiver, or is there something more sinister at play? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video. The truth revealed. 6 months after her accident, Sarah wheeled herself into Dominic's study while he was in the shower. She hadn't come to snoop. She just wanted to retrieve a book she remembered seeing on his bookshelf. But when she bumped against his desk, his phone lit up with a text message preview. "I miss you already. Last night was perfect. Can't wait until she's gone." Sarah sat very still, the phone screen dimming to black as she absorbed the impact of those few words. In that moment, something crystallized within her. Not just the knowledge of the betrayal, but a cold clarity about who her husband had become, or perhaps who he had always been, underneath the veneer of devotion. When Dominic emerged from the shower, she was waiting for him in the living room, his phone unlocked in her lap. "Who is she?" she asked simply. His face cycled through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, anger, and, finally, a kind of relief, as if he too had been waiting for this moment. "I think you know," he said, not bothering to reach for the phone. "Tell me anyway." "Celine, my assistant." He sat down across from her, running his hands through his wet hair. "It just happened, Sarah. I didn't plan it. Things don't just happen, Dominic. Day after day, you make choices. You have no idea what this has been like for me," he said, his voice rising. "Everything changed. Our whole life, our plans, our future. It was all gone in an instant." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You think I don't know? You think I wanted this? The difference is I didn't have a choice. You did." The conversation that followed was brutal in its honesty. Dominic admitted that the affair had been going on for months. He talked about feeling trapped, about the stress of becoming a caregiver when he had expected to be a partner. He talked about Celine's youth, her energy, the way she made him feel. "And how do I make you feel?" Sarah asked quietly. He couldn't look her in the eyes. "Guilty," he finally said. "You make me feel guilty." 2 weeks later, Dominic moved out. Divorce proceedings began shortly after. Sarah's lawyer was experienced in high-net-worth divorces and assured her that, given the circumstances, Dominic's infidelity, Sarah's disability, the length of their marriage, she would be well provided for financially. "He wants to be generous," the lawyer said. "The settlement offer is quite fair." "He wants to be free," Sarah corrected, "and he's willing to pay for it." The divorce proceeded quickly by legal standards. Dominic was eager to start his new life. There were no children to consider, and Sarah did not have the energy to fight over material possessions. She kept the house, a considerable financial settlement, and her dignity. What surprised her most during this period was her own calm. She had expected to be devastated, destroyed by the double blows of physical disability and marital betrayal. Instead, she felt a curious detachment, as if she were watching her life from a distance, like a character in one of her novels. It wasn't that she didn't feel pain. She did, and acutely. But alongside the pain was something else, a writer's analytical curiosity about how this story would unfold. The final divorce papers were delivered for her signature on a sunny spring morning. As Sarah signed her name, officially ending her marriage, Miriam brought her a cup of tea and an envelope. "This came for you," Miriam said. "Special delivery." Inside was an invitation, engraved on thick, cream-colored paper, with the names Dominic Vargas and Selene Montejo, along with a date, just 1 week after the divorce was finalized, and the name of an exclusive hotel known for its lavish weddings. Sarah looked up at Miriam, who was watching her with concerned eyes. "He's getting married," Sarah said, her voice remarkably steady. "Next Saturday." Miriam took the invitation, read it, and made a sound of disgust. "The ink on your divorce isn't even dry. This is cruel." "No," Sarah said thoughtfully. "This is revealing." She looked at Miriam. "He wants me to know how quickly he's moving on, how happy he is, how perfect his new life will be. Are you okay, Wad?" Sarah was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. "I'm going to go," she said finally. "To the wedding." "But why would you put yourself through that?" Sarah smiled, a small, private smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because, Miriam, I've always believed that a good writer needs to see the end of the story. A wedding, a deep mystery." And so, on a perfect day in June, Sarah Fuentes sat in her wheelchair in a corner of a hotel ballroom, watching Dominic marry Celine, the young, beautiful woman who had been his assistant, his mistress, and now his wife. The ceremony was lavish, no expense spared. Celine wore a designer gown that enhanced her slender figure. Dominic beamed with pride and something that looked almost like relief. Only a handful of guests noticed Sarah's presence. Those who did exchanged awkward glances, wondering why the ex-wife would attend, wondering at the small smile that played on her lips as she watched the proceedings. What none of them knew, not the guests, not Dominic, not even the radiant bride, was that Sarah had recently discovered something that would change everything. A secret that would turn this perfect wedding day into the first chapter of a very different story than the one Dominic and Celine believed they were beginning. As the newlyweds shared their first dance, Sarah's smile deepened. In her mind, she was already writing the next chapter. What do you think Sarah discovered about Celine? And how will her presence at the wedding change the outcome of the story? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. The revelation had come unexpectedly, 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized. Sarah had been working with Miriam on her physical therapy exercises, a grueling routine that left her exhausted but determined. As they finished, Miriam helped her back into her wheelchair and began tidying the exercise equipment. "You're making a lot of progress," Miriam said brightly. "Your upper body strength is so much better." Sarah wiped sweat from her brow. "It needs to be. I have to be more independent." "You will be. You're one of the most determined patients I've ever worked with." "I don't have much of a choice," Sarah said. "It's just me now." Miriam paused in her tidying. "Can I speak frankly, Mrs. Fuentes?" "Please call me Sarah. And yes, always. You've helped me bathe for the last 3 months. I think we're past the formalities." Miriam smiled briefly. Then she became serious. "That wedding invitation from your ex-husband. Why are you going? Most people would find that too painful." Sarah looked out the window for a long moment. "I need to see it," she said finally, "to make it real, to properly close that chapter." "And the woman he's marrying? Are you ready to see her too? Celine?" Sarah turned back to Miriam. "Yes, I need to see her too." Something flickered across Miriam's face, a brief hesitation, a shadow of unease. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her writer's instinct for human nuances immediately on alert. "Nothing. Just—" Miriam busied herself folding a towel. "I hope it gives you the closure you're looking for." But Sarah had caught that moment of hesitation. "Miriam," she said in a low voice, "is there something about Celine you're not telling me?" Miriam put down the towel and sighed. "I wasn't sure at first, and it's not my place to interfere in your personal affairs." "What weren't you sure about?" "When I met Miss Montejo, when she came here with Mr. Vargas, she seemed familiar. I couldn't place her at first." Sarah leaned forward in her wheelchair. "And now you can?" Miriam nodded slowly. "Before I worked for your home care agency, I worked at a private clinic in Miami. We cared for elderly patients, many of them quite wealthy. There was a woman there, Mrs. Eleanor Vidal, who had a companion, a young woman who helped her manage her affairs, who became like a granddaughter to her. And this companion resembled Celine? She didn't just resemble her. She was her bercer, although back then she went by the name Caroline Foster." Sarah felt a sudden chill. Her novelist's mind was already racing, seeing patterns, possibilities. "Tell me about this Caroline Foster, her relationship with Mrs. Vidal." "She was charming, attentive. Mrs. Vidal had no close family and grew to depend completely on Caroline. Over time, Caroline gained access to her accounts, her legal affairs. She isolated her from the few friends she had left." Miriam's face hardened. "And then, Mrs. Vidal changed her will, leaving everything to Caroline. Within a month, she died unexpectedly. The doctors called it natural causes. She was 87 after all. But some of us had our doubts." "What happened to Caroline? To Celine? After that?" "She inherited over $2 million and then disappeared. A few months later, there was an investigation. Other inconsistencies had come to light, questions about Mrs. Vidal's medication. But Caroline Foster had vanished without a trace." Miriam looked directly at Sarah. "Until I saw her here, calling herself Celine Montejo." Sarah sat very still, absorbing this information. "Are you certain it's the same woman?" "Absolutely certain. I recognized a small scar on her right wrist, and once I made the connection, I could see her clearly. She's changed her hair, lost some weight, but it's her. Have you told anyone else? The police? Dominic? Miriam shook her head. Who would believe me? I have no proof, just my memory. And the investigation never led to formal charges. It was just suspicious. Does she know you recognized her? I don't think so. I was careful not to react when I realized, and she's only been here a few times with Mr. Vargas. Sarah wheeled herself over to the window, looking out at the garden she had once tended with her own hands. Her mind worked quickly, connecting dots, seeing a bigger picture emerge. Miriam, she said without turning around, do you have any contacts from that clinic? Anyone who might have records or remember Caroline Foster? I'm still in touch with one of the nurses, and the clinic administrator was very disturbed by the whole situation. He might be willing to talk. Sarah nodded, making a decision. I would like you to get in touch with them, if you could. Discreetly. I need to know everything about Caroline Foster, how she operated, how she gained Mrs. Vidal's trust, how she disappeared. May I ask why? What do you plan to do with this information? Sarah turned her wheelchair, a new energy in her movements. I'm going to write a book, Miriam. A novel about a charming sociopath who preys on vulnerable people. A psychological thriller about identity, deception, and justice. You're going to expose her? Not directly. I'm going to tell a story, a work of fiction inspired by real events. And I'm going to make it so convincing, so rich in specific details, that anyone who knows Celine, who knows Caroline, will start to see the similarities. A slow smile spread across Miriam's face. That's quite brilliant, Mrs. Fuentes. Please, it's Sarah. She wheeled herself to her writing desk, opening her laptop with renewed purpose. And I need to get to work. I have a wedding to attend, and a novel to write. What do you think of Miriam's loyalty and her decision to share this information with Sarah? And is using fiction a valid way to expose the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The novel, The Truth. For the next few weeks, Sarah immersed herself in the investigation. Miriam connected her with former colleagues from the Miami clinic. Through them, Sarah learned more about Caroline Foster and her methods. Caroline had first appeared at the Marizul retirement community as a volunteer, reading to residents and helping with social activities. She had chosen Eleanor Vidal, a wealthy, childless widow who was still mentally lucid but physically frail. For months, Caroline had made herself indispensable to Mrs. Vidal, managing her correspondence, coordinating her medical appointments, and even handling her banking affairs. She was so attentive, the clinic administrator recalled during a phone call with Sarah. Always bringing Mrs. Vidal her favorite sweets, remembering the names of her great nieces and nephews, showing her photos from her supposed travels. Supposed? Sarah asked. Yes. Looking back, many of us wondered if any of what she told Mrs. Vidal was true. Her backstory changed constantly. Sometimes she'd mention growing up in New Orleans, other times in Chicago. She'd talk about studying abroad, but never named the university. After Mrs. Vidal changed her will, leaving her entire inheritance to Caroline instead of the distant relatives and charities she had previously named, things moved quickly. Mrs. Vidal's health suddenly declined. Caroline moved her to a private room, restricting visits to reduce stress. When Mrs. Vidal died, Caroline produced a medical power of attorney document that gave her the authority to refuse an autopsy. By the time questions arose, Caroline Foster had vanished. The inheritance had been transferred to offshore accounts. Her apartment was vacated, her phone disconnected. The few photographs that existed of her were of such poor quality that they were useless in any search. I always felt like we failed Mrs. Vidal, the administrator confessed to Sarah. We should have seen what was happening. We should have protected her. As Sarah dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Before Miami, there had been whispers of a similar situation in New Orleans. An older man who had fallen under the spell of a young caregiver who went by the name Clara Navarro. After his death, his children discovered that substantial assets had been transferred to her. But Clara Navarro had disappeared before any investigation could begin. "It's the same woman," Miriam said when Sarah shared this information. "Different name, same methods, and now she's Celine Montejo," Sarah said. "About to marry a rich man who just went through a traumatic life change. My accident, our divorce. She's following her pattern. Are you going to warn him?" Sarah considered this question carefully. Would he believe me, or would he see it as the bitter accusations of an ex-wife? Celine has already secured her position in his life. She's pulled him away from our old friends, encouraged him to switch investment advisors, even convinced him to move into a new house. "So what will you do?" Sarah pointed to her laptop, where an outline was taking shape. "I'm going to tell this story the way I know how, through fiction that reveals the truth." On the day of Dominic and Celine's wedding, Sarah attended not as a heartbroken ex-wife, but as a writer conducting research. She observed Celine's performance, the adoring glances at Dominic, the charming interactions with guests, the persona of the perfect bride. She noticed how Celine had already isolated Dominic from his old social circle. Most of the guests were friends or business partners Dominic had met recently. When the ceremony concluded, Sarah quietly left. She had seen what she needed to see. She now understood her characters, all of them, including herself. Back home, Sarah began to write with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. The novel, which she titled Veiled Intentions, centered on a character named Valeria, a con artist who assumed different identities to gain the trust of vulnerable individuals before disappearing with their assets. The novel followed her latest scheme, to marry a newly divorced man whose life had been upended by his ex-wife's accident. Sarah wrote with precision and psychological insight, drawing on her research into real-life con artists and sociopaths. She created Valeria not as a monster or a caricature, but as a complex predator, calculating yet occasionally vulnerable, ruthless, yet capable of faking deep emotions. Most importantly, she included specific, distinctive details that would be recognizable to anyone who knew Celine well. Her habit of twisting a lock of hair when she was concentrating, her collection of vintage perfume bottles, her claim to have studied art history in Paris, her aversion to seafood, despite claiming to have grown up on the coast. As the manuscript took shape, Sarah shared chapters with her longtime editor, Helena, who immediately recognized the quality of the work. "This is your best writing yet," Helena told her during a video call. "It has an authenticity, a razor-sharp insight. Your accident hasn't diminished your talent, Sarah. If anything, it's given your work a new depth." "Pain can be clarifying," Sarah replied. "It strips away pretense. The publisher is going to be thrilled. You've been missed in the literary world. How fast can we move on this? I feel a certain urgency." Helena raised an eyebrow. "Is this story based on real events? It seems terribly specific." Sarah smiled faintly. "All fiction is based on reality in some way. I've certainly been thinking about betrayal and deception lately." "Well, your timing is good. The fall publishing list has a hole where another thriller was delayed. If we move fast, Veiled Intentions could fill that spot." And so, just as Dominic and Celine returned from their honeymoon and began their new life together, Sarah's manuscript moved swiftly through the publication process. Advance copies were sent to critics, marketing plans were developed, and a launch date was set. "This is more than a comeback," Helena told her. "This is a rebirth." For Sarah, it was also something more. Justice was being crafted, one carefully worded sentence at a time. What do you think is the real reason Sarah wrote the book? And how do you think it will affect Celine and Dominic? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The public exposure. 3 months after Dominic and Celine's wedding, billboards featuring the cover of Veiled Intentions began appearing in major cities across the country. The image showed a woman's silhouette with multiple shadows, each taking a different form, a visual representation of the characters' shifting identities. Below the title was a tagline, "She becomes whoever you need her to be, until she takes everything you have." The publisher positioned the novel as Sarah Fuentes' triumphant return to literature after her accident. In interviews, Sarah spoke frankly about finding strength through storytelling during her recovery. "Writing this book saved me," she said on a popular literary podcast. "When everything else was taken from me, my mobility, my marriage, I still had my imagination, my ability to create worlds and characters." When asked if the novel's themes of betrayal mirrored her personal experience, Sarah was guarded in her response. "Writers draw from life, certainly, but Veiled Intentions is not an autobiography. It's an exploration of deception as both an art and a weapon." The early reviews were glowing. The New York Times called it a chilling, meticulously crafted thriller that gets under your skin with its authenticity. The Guardian praised Fuentes' stunning ability to inhabit the mind of a sociopath while maintaining moral clarity. Entertainment Weekly declared it her most personal and powerful work to date. As the launch day neared, Sarah's publisher arranged a modified book tour to accommodate her wheelchair. She would do signings at major bookstores, television appearances, and talks at literary festivals. The publicity would focus not just on the book, but on Sarah's resilience, her refusal to let personal tragedy silence her voice. Veiled Intentions debuted at number 3 on the bestseller list and climbed to number 1 within 2 weeks. Sales were driven by both critical acclaim and word of mouth. Readers found themselves unable to put the book down. Then, they eagerly discussed it with friends. One aspect that generated particular interest was the vivid realism of the main character. As one popular booktuber said in her review, "Valeria feels so authentic you wonder if she's based on a real person. There are moments when the specificity is almost uncanny, as if Fuentes had met this woman, studied her, knew exactly how her mind works." Sarah followed these reviews and reactions closely. Phase 1 of her plan was unfolding exactly as she had hoped. The book was being recognized for its literary merit, its psychological insight, and its almost documentary-like realism. Now it was time for Phase 2. Under a pseudonym, Sarah created accounts on several literary discussion forums and social media platforms. Using these aliases, she began asking subtle questions. Does anyone else feel like they've met someone like Valeria in real life? Or did the details about Valeria's scam in Miami seem so specific, perhaps inspired by a real case? These seeds of speculation took root quickly. Online book clubs began compiling lists of the characters' distinctive traits and habits, wondering if they matched any real-life cases of identity fraud. Amateur detectives began searching news archives for stories of elderly people conned by caregivers or companions. On a popular Reddit thread, one user claimed to have worked at a retirement community in New Orleans, where a similar case had occurred. The woman went by the name Clara. She charmed this rich widower, got him to change his will, and disappeared just after he died. The timeline matched what would have happened before Valeria's scam in Miami, according to the book. Sarah didn't need to fan these flames much. The collective curiosity of the internet did most of the work. Readers became investigators, piecing together a hypothetical real-life timeline for a Valeria-type con artist who might have operated in New Orleans, then in Miami, and might now be somewhere else, using a new identity. What Sarah hadn't fully anticipated was how quickly the speculation would move from the general to the specific. 6 weeks after the book's launch, a post appeared on a thriller fan forum that connected a number of dots. Sarah Fuentes' ex-husband remarried very quickly after their divorce. His new wife appeared in his life right after Fuentes' accident. In the book, Valeria targets a man whose life has been upended by his ex-wife's disability. Am I the only one who sees the parallel? This post was initially deleted by moderators for speculating on the author's personal life, but the idea had already been released into the wild. It resurfaced on Twitter, on Facebook groups, in the comments sections of book reviews. Sarah watched this development with mixed emotions. She had wanted the truth to emerge, but she hadn't expected it to happen so explicitly or to involve her so directly. She had hoped the focus would remain on Celine, Caroline, Clara, and their pattern of deception, not on Sarah's possible motives for writing the book. But the speculation kept spreading, gaining momentum, when a popular true crime podcast dedicated an episode to analyzing the similarities between veiled intentions and Sarah Fuentes' real-life situation. The hosts stopped short of making accusations, framing their discussion as an exploration of how authors transform personal experience into fiction. But they methodically listed the parallels, including the timeline of Fuentes' accident, her divorce, and her ex-husband's quick remarriage. One morning, Sarah received a call from Helena, her editor. "Have you seen the latest?" Helena asked without preamble. "The podcast?" "No, I listened to that yesterday. Not the podcast. There's an article in The Atlantic that examines the ethics of using fiction to expose real people. You're not named specifically, but the reference is clear." Sarah sighed. "That was inevitable, I suppose." "Sarah," Helena said cautiously, "I need to ask you directly. Is Veiled Intentions based on your ex-husband's new wife? Is Valeria a thinly veiled portrait of her?" There was a long pause before Sarah replied. "What I have written is fiction, Helena. Fiction informed by research, by observation, by my understanding of human nature. That's not really an answer. It's the only one I can give right now." After hanging up, Sarah wheeled herself over to the window, looking out at her garden, where the first signs of autumn were appearing. The novel had been on the market for 2 months. The speculation was growing. But it was still just that. Speculation. No one had yet connected Celine Montejo directly to Caroline Foster or Clara Navarro. For that to happen, Sarah needed someone with investigatory resources, someone who could follow a paper trail and dig through sealed records. She needed a journalist. As if in response to this thought, her phone rang again. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Sarah Fuentes speaking." "Miss Fuentes, my name is Michael Dominguez. I'm an investigative journalist for the Miami Herald. I was hoping to speak with you about your novel, Veiled Intentions." Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation. "What aspect of the novel interests you, Mr. Dominguez?" "The inspiration behind it. Specifically, the character of Valeria and her, shall we say, activities in Miami and New Orleans." "I'm always happy to talk about my creative process," Sarah said cautiously, "though I must point out that as a novelist, I draw from many sources." "Of course," Dominguez replied, matching her cautious tone. "But in researching some of the settings for your book, I have found some interesting parallels in the real world. Cases that involve older victims and a woman who seems to change identities. That sounds like promising material for an article." "Yes, it does. And given the timing of your novel, I was wondering if you might have information that could aid my investigation." Sarah paused, considering her answer. "Mr. Dominguez, I think we should meet in person. I would be available to come to my home tomorrow afternoon. What do you think is the true purpose of Sarah's book? And what do you think is the biggest risk she's taking by meeting with this journalist? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The collaboration with the journalist. When Michael Dominguez arrived the next day, Sarah was surprised at how different he was from what she had imagined. Instead of the hard-nosed reporter of her imagination, he was a thoughtful-looking man in his 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a worn leather messenger bag and moved with a careful precision that reminded her of a documentary filmmaker she had met once. After Miriam served him tea and discreetly withdrew, Sarah got straight to the point. Do you believe Valeria is based on a real person? A con artist who has operated under multiple names? Dominguez nodded. I've been following cases of financial abuse of the elderly for over a year. When I read your book, the parallels were astonishing. Not just general methods, but specific details that match cases in New Orleans and Miami. What led you to connect those cases? Patterns, Dominguez said, pulling a small notebook from his bag. The approach is always the same. Volunteer work to gain access, isolation of the victim from family or friends, rapid establishment of trust, changing of legal documents, sudden health decline of the victim, disappearance after assets are secured. And you believe these cases involve the same perpetrator? I do, and I believe you do as well. He looked at her directly. Miss Fuentes, your novel not only describes these patterns, but includes details that were never made public, such as the collection of vintage perfume bottles that Clara Navarro displayed in her New Orleans apartment, or the scar on Caroline Foster's right wrist. Sarah kept her expression neutral. As I said, I researched thoroughly, and now I'm wondering if your investigation extends to your ex-husband's new wife, Celine Montejo. The frankness of this statement hung in the air between them. Sarah took a sip of tea, collecting her thoughts. Mr. Dominguez, what are you investigating exactly? A novel or a crime? Both, potentially. The cases in New Orleans and Miami never led to criminal charges. The perpetrator disappeared too quickly, and the evidence was circumstantial. But together, they suggest a pattern of predatory behavior that may be continuing. He leaned forward. Ms. Fuentes, if Celine Montejo is the same woman as Caroline Foster and Clara Navarro, your ex-husband could be in danger. Financial danger, certainly, Sarah said. Selena has already encouraged him to review his investment portfolio and to change his will. Dominguez's eyebrows shot up. You know this for a fact? Dominic's former investment advisor is an old family friend. He called me, concerned, when Dominic suddenly transferred his accounts elsewhere. As for the will, Sarah hesitated. Miriam overheard a phone conversation when Celine was here one day. Celine was setting up an appointment with an estate lawyer, mentioning Dominic's outdated will needing an immediate review. And you didn't warn your ex-husband? Would he have believed the concerns of a bitter ex-wife in a wheelchair? Dominic has made his choice. He chose Celine over me, over our history, over everything we built together. So, is the novel your warning? Your way of exposing her? Sarah looked out the window for a long moment. The novel is a work of fiction, Mr. Dominguez. What you do with your investigation is your business. But if you find evidence that connects Selena Montejo to these other identities, to these other cases, I would be very interested to know. Dominguez studied her. You're walking a very fine line here, Miss Fuentes. Wheeling, actually, she said with a small smile. And yes, I'm doing it carefully. For the next few weeks, Michael Dominguez conducted his investigation with meticulous thoroughness. He traveled to New Orleans and Miami, interviewing staff at the facilities where Clara Navarro and Caroline Foster had worked. He tracked down relatives of the victims, poring over financial records and photographs. He filed public records requests for everything from property deeds to business licenses. Meanwhile, Veiled Intentions continued its ascent on the bestseller lists. Sarah's modified book tour put her back in the public eye, with profiles in major magazines, highlighting her resilience and her creative rebirth. In interviews, she deflected questions about real-life inspirations with practiced ease. All fiction contains elements of truth, refracted through the writer's imagination. She didn't mention that the novel's sales were particularly strong in the financial and legal circles where Dominic and Celine now socialized. She didn't need to. The ripples were spreading exactly as she had planned. 3 months after their initial meeting, Dominguez contacted Sarah to set up another visit. When he arrived, his demeanor was different, more confident, more energized. "I found the connection," he said as soon as they were alone. From his messenger bag, he pulled a folder. "It took persistence and a few lucky breaks, but I have evidence that Clara Navarro, Caroline Foster, and Celine Montejo are the same person." He presented his evidence methodically. A clear photograph of Clara Navarro from a charity event in New Orleans, showing the distinctive scar on her right wrist. Medical records from a Miami clinic, where Caroline Foster had been treated for that same scar, apparently the result of a childhood accident. School records from a Chloe Munoz, who had left her hometown of Phoenix at 18, with a yearbook photo that showed a younger version of the same woman. Most damning of all, financial records showed that funds from the New Orleans victims' accounts had been transferred to an offshore entity, which then funded Caroline Foster's credentials as a private healthcare companion. "She's careful, but not perfect," Dominguez explained. "Every time she reinvents herself, she keeps certain patterns. Her first names always start with a C. She always claims some connection to European education. She always collects something distinctive, like those vintage perfume bottles. This is more than just similarities," Sarah observed. "This is proof, enough for my editor to approve a major investigative article. We're fact-checking now, and our legal team is vetting everything." "But Miss Fuentes," he hesitated. "Once this is published, there will be no ambiguity. Everyone will know that Valeria was not just inspired by Celine Montejo, but essentially is Celine Montejo. And they will know that you knew this when you wrote the book." Sarah nodded slowly. "I understand. When will the article run?" "Next Sunday, on the front page of the investigative section." He gathered his materials. "Is there anything you'd like to say officially about your knowledge of these connections?" "Only that, as a novelist, I observe, I research, I imagine. If reality and fiction sometimes converge, that is the mystery of creativity." As he prepared to leave, Dominguez paused at the door. "Miss Fuentes, what you have done here, using a novel to bring a predator to light, is unorthodox but effective. I just hope you are prepared for the fallout." "Mr. Dominguez," Sarah said, "when my husband left me for a woman half my age, a few months after I was paralyzed, I learned something important about fallout. Sometimes it reveals what was hidden. Sometimes it clears the air. What do you think of Sarah's methodical plan to use a novel to expose the truth? And how do you think Dominic will react to the news about his wife? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The fallout, the lawsuit, and the unraveling. Dominic's fallout from Michael Dominguez's exposure unfolded with the inevitable dramatic flair of a well-plotted thriller. Within days, authorities in both New Orleans and Miami announced they were reopening investigations into the deaths and financial exploitation of Celine's previous victims. Forensic financial experts began tracing the movement of funds through various shell corporations and offshore accounts. Celine herself disappeared immediately after the article's publication, a flight that only seemed to confirm her guilt. She left behind a hastily packed suitcase at the house she shared with Dominic and withdrew $50,000 in cash from their joint account before his access could be frozen. Dominic, in shock and humiliation, withdrew from public life. He issued a brief statement through his lawyer, declaring himself another victim of Selene Montejo's deception and requesting privacy. Privately, he began the process of annulling his marriage on grounds of fraud. For Sarah, the weeks after the article's publication brought a strange mix of professional acclaim and personal scrutiny. Veiled Intentions stayed at the top of the bestseller lists, now read not just as a psychological thriller, but as a real-life exposé crafted into fictional form. Literary critics debated the ethics of her approach, with opinions divided on whether she had pioneered a new form of journalistic fiction or crossed a line by using her novelist's platform to pursue what was essentially a personal vendetta. Sarah gave few interviews during this period, turning down most requests with a simple statement, "The book speaks for itself." When pressed on her motivations, she maintained that her primary concern had been to prevent Selene from harming others, including Dominic. Then, 6 weeks after Dominguez's article was published, Sarah received an unexpected letter. Opening it, she found a legal notice informing her that Dominic Vargas was filing a lawsuit for defamation against her, seeking 10 million euros in damages. The lawsuit alleged that she had maliciously and knowingly published false information designed to destroy the plaintiff's marriage and reputation. Sarah read the document twice, noting with interest that Dominic was being represented by Alan Thompson, one of the city's most aggressive, high-profile litigators. The suit claimed that Sarah had fabricated connections between Selene Montejo and other individuals out of jealousy and vindication, and that her novel constituted a thinly veiled attack designed to cause maximum personal and professional harm. Sighing, she picked up the phone and called her literary agent, who connected her with the publishing house's legal team. That same evening, she had retained Patricia Rogers, a respected First Amendment lawyer who defended authors against defamation suits. "This is actually good news," Patricia told her during their first meeting. "Defamation requires falsehood. If what you wrote about or based on Selene is substantially true, that's an absolute defense. But the novel is fiction," Sarah pointed out. "I never claimed it was based on real people." Patricia smiled. "Fiction has always been a vehicle for truth, Miss Fuentes. And thanks to Mr. Dominguez's excellent investigative work, we have independent verification of the connections between Selene and her previous identities. Mr. Vargas's lawsuit, in fact, gives us a forum to present all of this evidence in a very public way. So you think we'll win? I think Mr. Vargas has made a grave tactical error. Even filing this lawsuit keeps the story alive in the media, and discovery will be enlightening. So we proceed to court, unless they withdraw the suit?" "Yes, and given Mr. Thompson's reputation, that's unlikely. It would hurt his brand." The preliminary hearing was set for a Tuesday in early February. As Patricia had predicted, the courthouse was surrounded by media, entertainment reporters, as well as legal journalists, all drawn to the unusual intersection of literature, law, and personal drama. Sarah arrived early, accompanied by Miriam and Patricia. She had chosen her outfit with care, a simple but elegant navy blue dress, professional without being severe. As she wheeled her way to the courthouse entrance, cameras flashed and reporters shouted, "Miss Fuentes, do you regret using your novel to expose your ex-husband's wife?" "Sarah, did you write Veiled Intentions as an act of revenge?" "Miss Fuentes, how do you respond to accusations that you violated literary ethics?" Patricia shielded her from the worst of it, repeating, "No comment until after the hearing," as they made their way inside. In the courtroom, Sarah positioned her wheelchair at the defense table, looking straight ahead as Dominic and his legal team entered through a side door. It was the first time she had seen Dominic since his wedding to Selene. He looked older, the stress of the past few months evident in the new lines around his eyes and mouth, He wore an expensive suit that hung a little loosely on him, suggesting weight loss. When their eyes met briefly, his expression was unreadable, a mixture of anger, exhaustion, and something that might have been regret. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the session to order. After preliminary statements that established the nature of the case, she addressed both legal teams. I have reviewed the filings in this matter, and I have serious concerns about the plaintiff's claims. She began. Mr. Thompson, your client is alleging defamation based on a work of fiction, yet much of what was allegedly defamatory has been independently verified by a journalistic investigation. Can you clarify the specific falsehoods that you claim Ms. Fuentes published? Thompson stood. Your Honor, the issue is not whether there are similarities between Ms. Fuentes' fictional character and Miss Montejo. The issue is Ms. Fuentes' intent. She deliberately crafted this novel as a weapon designed to destroy my client's marriage and reputation. Intent is not an element of defamation, counsel. Truth is the defense. Are you arguing that Ms. Fuentes' characterization was false? We are arguing that it was malicious and calculated to cause harm, Thompson replied. The judge's expression suggested she was unimpressed. Ms. Rogers, your response. Patricia stood. Your Honor, Mr. Vargas's lawsuit fails on multiple grounds. First, Veiled Intentions is marketed and clearly understood to be fiction. Second, to the extent that the novel draws from real events, those events have been independently verified by Mr. Dominguez's investigative reporting. And third, there is a clear public interest in exposing a pattern of elder exploitation and fraud. The hearing continued with technical legal arguments, but it became clear that the judge was skeptical of Dominic's claims. She repeatedly asked Thompson about the specifics. What was exactly false? Where was the demonstrable harm that came directly from the novel, as opposed to Celine's own actions and subsequent investigations? Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the judge ruled. I am denying the plaintiff's request for a preliminary injunction against further publication or promotion of the novel. Based on the evidence presented, there appears to be substantial truth to the underlying factual inspirations for Ms. Fuentes' work. While I understand Mr. Vargas's distress at finding himself adjacent to this situation, the facts suggest that his complaints are properly with Miss Montejo, not Miss Fuentes. It wasn't a full dismissal of the case, but it was a significant initial victory. As the courtroom began to clear out, Sarah found herself face to face with Dominic in the narrow hallway. For a moment, neither spoke. You could have just told me, he said finally, his voice low. You didn't have to do it this way. Would you have believed me? Sarah asked quietly. Or would you have seen it as a discarded wife's desperate attempt to poison your happiness? He had no answer for that. After a moment, he walked past her toward the exit. Sarah watched him go, feeling not triumph, but a complex mix of vindication and sadness. They had once loved each other. They had built a life together. Now they were strangers meeting in a courtroom, the wreckage of their relationship entangled in legal arguments and public scrutiny. What do you think of the judge's ruling? And what do you think is the most painful thing for Dominic to accept right now? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Outside, the media were waiting. Patricia had prepared Sarah for this moment, helping her craft a brief statement that acknowledged the ruling without seeming triumphant. As cameras flashed and microphones were thrust at her, Sarah spoke with clarity and calm. Today's ruling confirms what I have maintained all along, that the creative work I produced, while fiction, was thoroughly researched and rooted in documentable patterns. My motivation was never to cause pain, but to prevent further harm. I take no pleasure in the difficulties these revelations have caused my ex-husband. who is himself a victim of deception. I hope that now we can move forward, allowing the proper authorities to continue their investigations without the distraction of this lawsuit. As she wheeled her way toward her waiting car, a reporter asked one last question. "Ms. Fuentes, do you regret writing the book now that you've seen the fallout?" Sarah paused, considering. "No," she said finally. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary, but I don't regret using my voice to speak the truth, even when that truth was inconvenient. That is what writers do. We observe, we reveal, we sometimes illuminate what others would prefer to keep hidden." In the car ride home, Patricia was euphoric. That judge almost dismissed the case. Thompson will likely advise Dominic to drop the lawsuit rather than proceed to a full trial, which he will almost certainly lose. "So it's really over?" Sarah asked. "The legal battle, probably. The personal fallout, that's another matter. The reconstruction and the legacy." Indeed, 2 weeks later, Dominic's lawsuit was formally withdrawn. The court filing cited a desire to focus energies on cooperating with ongoing investigations rather than pursuing civil litigation. The media treated it as an implicit admission that Sarah's portrayal had been substantially accurate. Meanwhile, authorities in New Orleans and Miami had upgraded their Celine, Caroline, Clara investigations to include possible charges of criminal fraud, identity theft, and in the case of Mrs. Vidal, elder abuse. An international search was being conducted, though most experts believed she had likely adopted another identity and was already setting up in a new location, looking for her next victim. For Sarah, the end of the legal threat brought not euphoria, but a quiet relief. The vindication of her methods was satisfying, but it didn't erase the pain that had preceded them. The accident, Dominic's betrayal, the collapse of the life she had once imagined for herself. One afternoon, as winter began to give way to early spring, Sarah sat in her garden, watching the first crocuses sprout from the ground, small signs of renewal after the dormancy. Her phone rang. It was Dominic. "Can I come see you?" he asked without preamble. "There are things I need to say to you face to face." Sarah hesitated. Then she agreed. "Tomorrow afternoon," she said. "Miriam will be here. Don't you trust me?" "I don't trust the situation. Too much has happened." He arrived the next day, looking more serene than he had in the courtroom, but still bearing the marks of stress. Sarah received him in the living room, with Miriam discreetly present in the adjoining kitchen. "Thank you for seeing me," Dominic began, sitting across from her wheelchair. "I wanted to apologize for the lawsuit, for everything." "What made you change your mind?" Sarah asked. "You seemed quite set on painting me as a vengeful ex-wife bent on destroying your happiness." He sighed. "After the hearing, I did something I should have done months ago. I actually looked at the evidence, the documentation Dominguez found, the patterns of behavior, the financial trails. It's overwhelming." "Yes, it is. Why didn't you come to me directly, Sarah, before the book, before the article? Why didn't you show me what you discovered?" "I think you know the answer to that. You wouldn't have believed me. You would have seen it as a discarded wife's attempt to sabotage your new relationship. By the time Miriam recognized Celine, you were already deeply committed to your narrative that she was perfect, that she was the future you wanted. That's not fair, isn't it? You left me when I needed you most. You married her with indecent haste. You've been reviewing your financial arrangements at her urging. Tell me, did she encourage you to distance yourself from old friends, to consider moving to a new place where her past was less likely to catch up to her?" His silence was an answer. "What happens now?" he asked finally, his voice subdued. "That's up to you. The evidence in Dominguez's article is substantial. It's likely that the authorities in New Orleans and Miami will reopen their investigations, now that they know her current identity and location. As for your marriage, your assets, those are your decisions. You must be enjoying this. Bitterness creeping into his tone, watching everything fall apart for me. No, Dominic, I don't enjoy your pain. I never did. What I wanted was for the truth to be known. What you do with that truth is your choice. After he left, Sarah sat in silence for a long time, looking out at her garden, where autumn was giving way to winter. She felt no triumph or vindication, only a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. The story that had begun with her accident and Dominic's betrayal was entering its final chapter, but her own story, her life as a writer, as a woman rebuilding her identity after a profound loss, was just beginning. A new volume. 2 years after the publication of Veiled Intentions, Sarah attended the premiere of the Netflix adaptation. She wore a custom-designed dress that accommodated her wheelchair while making her feel elegant and confident. The red carpet included a ramp, a small accommodation the producers had insisted on, without Sarah having to ask. Reporters shouted questions as she wheeled her way down the carpet. Most focused on the adaptation, but one asked about Celine, who had recently been extradited to face charges in Miami. Ms. Fuentes, do you feel vindicated by Celine Montejo's prosecution? Sarah paused, considering. This isn't about vindication. It's about accountability. Miss Montejo made choices that harmed vulnerable people. Those choices have consequences. That's not revenge. It's justice. At Incite, before the screening began, Sarah found herself seated next to the actress who played her in the series, a talented woman who had spent months learning to authentically portray life with paraplegia. I hope I did justice to your story, the actress said earnestly. It's not just my story anymore, Sarah replied. It now belongs in part to everyone who sees it, to everyone who finds something of themselves in it. As the lights dimmed and the opening scenes began, Sarah felt a surprising sense of peace. The events portrayed on screen, her accident, Dominic's betrayal, her discovery of Celine's true nature, were no longer open wounds. They had been transformed, first through her writing, and now through this visual retelling, into a narrative with a meaning beyond personal pain. After the screening, at the reception, Sarah was approached by a young woman in a wheelchair, a journalist covering the event for a disability-focused publication. Your story has meant so much to our community, she said, not because you overcame disability, but because you refused to let it make you invisible. That was never an option for me, Sarah replied with a smile. I've always been too stubborn for invisibility. What's next for you? Another novel? Yes, and possibly a memoir, and some advocacy work through my foundation. No more revenge novels? The journalist asked with a knowing smile. Sarah laughed. I think I did enough damage with just one. Besides, revenge was never really the goal. The goal was the reclamation of my voice, my autonomy, my future. Later that night, in her hotel room, Sarah received a text message from Dominic with a photo attached. It showed Sarah's garden at home, where the early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. The text said, "Life goes on." And beautifully. Sarah smiled at the image. Yes, life went on, differently than planned, shaped by losses and obstacles she never anticipated, but with its own unexpected rewards. She had lost a husband, but found a deeper sense of self. She had lost mobility, but gained perspective. She had faced betrayal and emerged not bitter, but wiser, more authentic, more herself. The story that had begun with tragedy, with metal twisting on rain-slicked roads, with a husband's wandering eye, with paralysis and betrayal, had evolved into something rich and complex, and ultimately affirming. Not a happy ending, exactly, but her own ending, crafted with intention, with resilience, with the quiet strength that had been inside her all along, just waiting for circumstances difficult enough to bring it fully to the surface. What do you think is the most important lesson from Sarah's story? And what do you think is the real reason she chose to write a fictionalized account instead of a straightforward exposé? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories.